Namaste and welcome back to another edition of Live, Love, Engage, and another awesome day for me because I have a guest on the show who's joining us from Pennsylvania, and her name is Randy Rolfe. And I want to welcome you first off to Live, Love, and Engage.
Thank you, Gloria. I love the name of your show. It's Live, Love, and Engage is really important.
Absolutely,
They
yeah.
all are, but especially Engage these
Thank you.
days.
Yeah. I think if we stay engaged, then it helps us to live and love better anyway.
Exactly.
Well, let me share with our listeners and those of you watching on YouTube why I have this wonderful woman on our show today. She is no slouch when it comes to all sorts of things. I mean, talk about a multi-hyphenate type of person. She's, I think, almost done it all. It seems like she's an internationally known author, speaker, counselor, and media personality, known especially for her sound advice on parenting and healthy lifestyle. And she delights in bringing out the best in people for their relationships, their health, and their spiritual being. And as I said, she has a diverse set of accomplishments, first and foremost being wife, mother, grandmother, daughter, and then family therapist, nutrition educator, lawyer, theologian, world traveler, and mentor to home-based entrepreneurs. And I assume at some point you must have a little downtime once in a while with all of these things, I hope.
Well, yes, I have a wonderful lifestyle. I married my college sweetheart, and we've been together over for 50 years, 52 years.
Wow.
And so we have a wonderful lifestyle, and I just want everyone else to be as happy as we are, basically.
Well, that you are to be congratulated because you don't hear too often about people being married 50 years, let alone even more than 50 years. And you certainly don't look old enough to be married that long. So you must have been a real child bride.
I was 21. My parents made me wait until I was 21.
Okay. Well,
so you can do the math.
Well, you have done so many things, and I thought, I know that you're very passionate about parenting. So I thought we'd start off talking today about what caused you to actually transform your life from being a lawyer to actually being this parenting advocate.
Well, thank you for the question. It's one of my favorite stories. I started out as a lawyer because I had traveled all over the world with my family, and I wanted to make peace. I thought, well, law, if you knew the law, the international law between countries, you could help people be a diplomat and really help make peace. And so I worked for a big law firm in Philadelphia, and I realized that it wasn't just about being a diplomat. It was about controlling corporations and getting them to do the right thing for the people. And meanwhile, I had gotten married, and I realized there wasn't time being a lawyer to be the mom and the wife I wanted to be, especially in those days with a big law firm and one of the first women ever hired there. And so we decided to buy an old farmhouse in upstate New York to start our family. And we rebuilt it ourselves and had the children born up there. And people started asking me why our children were so easy and so good. And I'm like, well, we thought a lot about this before we had our kids, and we're just following what we think is a natural program. And so I started giving lectures on it and decided to write a book about it. And I got on a lot of TV shows with my first book, You Can Postpone Anything But Love. So that led to counseling and lecturing and TV appearances and all of that. And I never looked back. I just loved helping people find the inner parent, really. We know so much, and then if we're advice shopping all the time, your mom can say one thing, your grandmom, your aunt, your neighbor, or the doctor, the priest, it gets very confusing, and you have to look inside. And I really believe in following the basic human pattern. That parenting has worked for a couple million years, so let's get to it.
That's true. Our ancestors way back did not have books on, they didn't have My Mother, My Child, which I did have. I think that was the name of it, wasn't it? That book that you get at baby showers that's supposed to, help you raise your child. Yeah, so it's obviously we've survived this long, so people manage to parent without having all of that. But I want to go back to, because I was intrigued by the name of your book, that you can postpone everything or anything but love. Explain that a little bit, because that's intriguing.
Yes, you can postpone
concept.
anything but love. I was practicing law in Philadelphia. Well, we ran out of money in our house in upstate New York. So we came back to Philadelphia. We both got legal jobs again. And I was finishing up a job I was doing on a federal grant in air pollution control law. And I was driving home. I thought, my kids are 3 and 1, and I can postpone my career. I want to spend the time with my kids. So I was thinking about a parenting book, and all of a sudden, you can postpone anything but love. You have to love your children today and yesterday and tomorrow. You can't postpone love. Love is a thing you do in the moment. So I thought, that's the name of my book. And so I just wrote out all the natural things you can count on, that kids want to please you. They do respond. They notice everything, some of these principles. And I called it, You Can Postpone Anything But Love. And many times people have told me, well, doesn't that apply to everything? And I'm like, yes. Yes, you got to love your husband today. You got to love nature today. You got to love your spiritual source today. So thank you for asking. It's still my favorite title of all time.
Yeah, I love it as well. And I would say also, you also have to love yourself too, right?
Absolutely, every day. Yes. More often than that. Yes.
Yeah. Now, I know that you are an advocate for what you call actually spiritual parenting, which I think we're even kind of hinting about here already in our discussion. So what actually does that mean for parents, nowadays, especially? It's been a crazy year and a half with the pandemic and disruptions to everyone's normal schedules and things like that. So tell me a little bit about, what do you mean by spiritual parenting? And then how does that affect people, or how can parents
Sure. Yes.
apply that? There we go. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, the basic idea is, like I said, going back to the natural pattern of parent-child and believing that works. So it's about having faith in humanity and knowing that there's a greater force than just you molding your child. Your child comes as a fully formed person. They're just they're smaller and less experienced, but they already have a personality. They have drives. They have a willingness to be parented, because otherwise, a million years ago, you would have died if you got your parents angry at you. If you got abandoned, to be the end. It wouldn't be a nation that would pick you up and take care of you. So it's I mean, if you're religious, it's great. I found in my counseling practice that people who knew that the child already had a soul, or whatever you want to call it, and they weren't starting with a wax, they did better at adjusting to being a really successful parent. People who just thought that we were just, each of us is going to mold our child and it's all up to us. They didn't trust the child, I found. So it's belief, faith, and trust all in a package. So that you can, when I discovered, when I had my own child, he knew what he wanted. He let me know if he was wet or cold or hungry or tired. He let me know. I'm like, okay, he knows how to tell me what he needs. I don't have to invent it. So it's the spiritual side for me is very general of just believing that this is going to work and having the confidence to know that even if you're a first-time parent, it's going to work if you trust yourself and trust your child and stay in constant communication. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And but I also know sometimes I think it's that's also then becomes a challenge is if you're not used to maybe trusting yourself and now you've been, given this new life to take care of that is putting all of its faith in you to be able to take care of, him or her. And now how do you and maybe this is something that you've done like in your counseling, how do you help people then start to be able to develop that confidence in themselves to be able to trust their instincts that they really can do this?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of the motivational training these days is about rediscovering your own power and success. We're supposed to be happy, healthy people. And I try to take parents back to looking at their own history, at their own parents, their grandparents, and going back in imagining Paleolithic times. Why didn't the kids walk into the fire or walk off the cliff or get carried off by a tiger? It's because this process works and you can trust that. And today there's so many other stresses on parents that time and quality time is really hard to come by. So it's really important that parents take the time to nurture themselves. And sometimes the other parent is not on the same beam. So that's another challenge. But, if someone's criticizing your parenting, okay, you step back. Is there any truth to this? Maybe not. I'm doing what I believe in. I've thought it through in the past, and it's working for me. I will follow through. So to some extent, you need to have some boundaries. It's really emotional intelligence and building your own self-confidence.
Yeah, and that is so important to be able to, for us to be able to do that. And I know it can be scary, but to be able to then really start to trust that even looking back at history, I like that. That's a really good way of looking. I mean, even going back, like you say, Paleolithic times, people were able to, we're still here because they were able to keep their children safe. And so there is that, there is still an instinct within us to do that. But I know sometimes it can be, you hear conflicting advice and then you start getting confused with, and especially with social media. But even I had, I have had a wonderful older sister who did not have children, who still sent me an article one time about parenting, but she was nice about, you are still doing a better job than our mom did. And, so she really appreciated me, but she's like, I know sometimes, I've seen how, your daughter interacts with you. And I think, maybe this might help you. And I was a bit resistant at first, but, but I think I came across it not too long ago, looked at it again and was like, yeah, my daughter knew how to push my buttons when she was 3. I used to say she was 3 going on 13 and it was 4 going on 14. But it's because I wasn't really trusting myself enough to even, and that's why that happened. That's why I allowed her to kind of get under my skin a bit more than I would now. In hindsight, I could do a better job now, but then again, she turned out pretty darn great. So I guess I did okay.
Well, I think, yes, the proof is in the pudding in that sense. And it's hard to judge with, there's so much now invading the family space, that parents need to be even stronger in that sense, that, well, yeah, maybe all your 8-year-old friends have cell phones, but I just don't think it's the best thing right now for you. So, you really have to do your own homework of forgiving those who didn't do right by you, and knowing the power that you have within, so that you can make good decisions for your own family.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I know that I have, like I said, I had loving mother, but she did some things that drove me crazy at times, and I've tried to, kind of go not do those things. But you still slip up and make mistakes. So how do you, what do you tell parents who may feel that it's like, oh, I've like ruined my child for life. They're going to be in therapy, for years now because of whatever I just did. So I'm sure you probably come across that in dealing with clients as well. What do you tell parents who might kind of feel sometimes like they've just, I really screwed up?
Yeah, I absolutely love that question, because we are modeling for our children at all times. They don't miss anything. We laugh that a 2-year-old will come out with some silly phrase that we use that we didn't even realize we used. But the point is to model forgiving yourself and asking for forgiveness and making amends. And it's never too late to go to a child at 33 or 53, as well as 13 or 3, and say, I really got angry and I lost control last night, and that really isn't what I meant to do, and I'll try harder not to do it next time. I was just completely overwhelmed by what was going on at work, or a phone call I got or something. And there are better ways to handle that. And what I wish I had done is blah, blah, blah. I should have taken 5 minutes and calmed myself down and then told you why I was feeling disappointed in what you did. So it's never too late. And that's one of the things I always say, you always have a second chance with children, because they are forgiving and resilient if you ask for it. So if you're afraid they'll go into therapy, you can first, set it up so they can tell their therapist that mom tried to make good. I definitely had challenges in my family. Both parents had serious drinking problems, and I was the firstborn, so I was kind of the peacekeeper and trying to keep everything going and make sure dinner was on the table, and never learned to cook, but I sure was telling them all the time, isn't it time? Isn't it time? So, but they were very loving parents, and watching how they interacted and how they cared about us, I just felt like there's a better way. We can do this without addiction. So that's one of the things I try to help parents, and one of my books is about that, parents that come from dysfunctional families, which sometimes looks like more than a half. Because civilization is really hard on families.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's, similar situation for me. Yeah. My dad was an alcoholic, and it was, but I knew they loved me. And it was just, he had issues. My mom had issues. And then, of course, as I got older, I could understand more and more of it, and seeing even some of the family dynamics with even like my grandmother. And it's like, oh, that's why mom was that way. Okay.
Yeah.
And, and I could forgive them. And I think that's the other important thing to remember. And one of the things I've done is that, they did the best they could with what they knew at the time. And I did the best I could in raising my kids with what I knew. And as long as we can endeavor to improve each generation, then I think that's all really we can do.
Yes, and come back to you can postpone anything but love. If they know you love them unconditionally, a lot can be healed.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything that you, looking back at your career and raising your family, is there anything that you wish you had known then that you know now um, that might have helped you
Um,
at all?
yeah, I wish I knew more about marketing
Oh.
because I really want to get this word out that parenting is so important and our society doesn't appreciate it enough.
Mm,
They really encourage parents to outsource eating, outsource school, outsource vacations and camps and entertainment. So there's less and less of the family just sitting, smiling together, asking what's new, taking a walk, just being together. And so having those opportunities to show your love. And so, counseling is, one family at a time. So I wish I had known more about how to get speaking gigs and go online now is the trick of really reaching more people with a message.
yeah.
So marketing, yeah. If you
Yeah.
want to get a message out, study marketing. And they say, a lot of people that are driven by helping others don't realize how useful that can be.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting though you mentioned about that there's so many outside things that parents are looking for to do. And I suppose, if we have to look for a silver lining in the pandemic, it was like this, especially last year in particular, you know, we were home with the kids, sometimes even with older children, we're and locked down again. But those empty nesters weren't so empty anymore. In fact, that was our daughter she was in Europe and had to come home because everything was closed down there. And so she, moved back home for a while. And we did, spend some time. It's nice to be able to spend time doing, things like playing board games or, not just having to look for um, outside things to be able to do that there's lots that you can do right at home. I hope my internet is behaving itself. I just got a message saying it's unstable. No, behave.
Yeah, I see you fine. Yeah, so it's so true. And because the society, we're looking at, younger and younger school and before and after programs, just so that the parents can do their employment. But if, there are other countries that seem far more civilized in the sense that they do support parents at least the first year or two or even three. They give them more time off for family things. And you save so much expense and pain just by doing that as a society. So I'm really an advocate for appreciating how important parenting is. Each parent is struggling to do their best, but as a society, we could do more to help them.
Yeah, absolutely. What is there anything that an individual could do in that respect to be able to, also be an advocate for parents?
Well, I think um, certainly speaking openly, voting in favor of programs that help families support, really push for family leave time.
Mm,
And not just moms, but dads, because they love their kids just as much as the moms. But we're still coming out of sort of that industrial revolution where we thought the men could earn the living, but that changed. That changed in the mid 20th century. Now you need two incomes to have a middle class life, and there are so many single parent families that it's just not fair. So you might push for, fairer for living wages. That
mm,
would help families tremendously,
yeah,
and for
absolutely.
more social, not necessary handouts, but just encouraging companies to have better leave programs.
Yeah, definitely. Um, Is there anything that you're curious about right now that maybe that's got you, as you're uh, in this stage of life, you're a grandmother, you've been a parent advocate for a long time. What kind of keeps you going? What are you curious about right now?
Well, certainly talking to more parents about these issues. And I guess what I'm most curious about is how it's going to unfold for this next generation.
Mm.
There are so many challenges in front of them. And if parents know how to build those boundaries and get on the parent controls for the computers and the tablets, and with watching the grandchildren come up, um, they have a very different world from the one you and I, or even my children had. And I often say to my children, you got a real challenge. It seemed hard in our day, but you got it harder now. And I'm very proud of what my kids are doing with their families. But as a society, I mean, I am really curious of how it will unfold. And so many young people are concerned about the international situation, climate change. And I hope approach to these situations.
Mm. You froze a little bit there. Can you say what you hope again? I
Oh,
don't know if
yes.
you, yeah.
I mean, I said that what I'm curious about is, can they maintain a hope and a positive
Ah,
approach to these
okay.
challenges,
Awesome.
and engage,
Yeah.
like you say, to show their love, and not get paralyzed by fear and worry,
Hmm.
but rather, again, believe in humanity and in family, and that we can solve our challenges today.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so good. And and I think also it's good that parents should remember that they are in charge of the family, and that they can set the rules, and they can actually limit screen time. They can they don't have to give in to the peer pressure out there, to have kids do this stuff. I mean, because as my kids were coming up, they were starting to, in middle school, more kids were starting to have phones and things like that. And I held out. It was like I waited until high school, and I wouldn't even let my son had to earn the money for his Xbox, because I didn't even want to give that to him either. Because it's like, no, I wanted him to read. That you've got time enough for that stuff later. Um, but but it is interesting that even putting limits on computers doesn't always work, because my son figured out how to disable the parental control on the computer system. But it served him well, because now he does cybersecurity. So, he was just
He had a skill, a gift there.
exactly. So you never know. You never know how these things work out.
Yeah, but
Um,
it is so important for parents to realize that they still are in charge. That's
yeah.
why they had that child.
Mhm.
And it's important that they realize that there, of course, there's all kinds of advice and influence coming in, but they are making the decisions, and they need to talk them through with the other parent, if there is one, or with someone that they really trust to listen. But they have to make those decisions themselves, and hopefully before the time comes. And so that's why I always say you get a second chance, because a child might ask a question that you just didn't think it was coming for another 2 years. And if you mess up, just think about it for a week and come back and say, I did a terrible job explaining that. So there's always a second chance.
Love that. Um, if somebody out there listening, or watching on YouTube, wants to be able to learn more about you, maybe check out your books or what else that you have to offer in the way of advice for parents, what's the best place that, how can people get a hold of you?
Sure. Through my website. It's just Randy Rolfe at randyrolfe.com is my email. And the website is randyrolfe.com. And that's Randy with a Y, because I was born long before the I's. So it's R-A-N-D-Y and R-O-L-F-E and the E on the end of the Rolfe. And my husband's John Rolfe, named after one of the founders of the Virginia colony. So that's how you can remember it.
Very cool. Very nice. Awesome. Well, I have enjoyed our conversation, and I can see why you have been an expert for a while, and you've got a lot of good advice, and hopefully those listening today will pick up on it and be able to start learning how to trust themselves and know that they've got this. They can do it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Gloria. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank everyone out there for watching and for listening. I appreciate you. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.